Hey folks, so Premier's just going to have a brief opening statement, then open for questions. We've got about 20 minutes here. For those that are joining on the line, we're going to tend towards questions in the room. It's not going to be moderated, but closer to the end, feel free to pitch in with the questions there too.
Ready? Well, thank you everybody for coming. Today, the Minister of Finance has released our budget for this year, a budget that will protect Saskatchewan families, a budget that will continue to build Saskatchewan communities and ultimately provide us with the opportunity to grow our province. As the Minister of Finance had indicated, we have been through this past year in Saskatchewan and across Canada the largest health and economic event since World War II. But I would say that Saskatchewan people are resilient, and not only will we be able to recover, but we most certainly will be able to recover to those pre-pandemic levels and then continue to grow our economy, grow our jobs, and grow our opportunity for this generation and the next into the future. I'm confident in the people of this province that we will be able to achieve that. And the first step in achieving that is for us to have access to vaccines for the vast majority of Saskatchewan people to make the choice to get vaccinated so that we can get back to some degree of normal in this province and be there when the world ultimately starts to rev its economic engine. Saskatchewan continues to have what the world needs, and we have a great opportunity to participate in a global economic recovery in a post-COVID environment when vaccines are ultimately available to the people of this province, the people of this nation, and ultimately the people around the world. So, with that, seeing no questions.
How firmly committed are you to the 26-27 timetable for balance if the economic fundamentals go wrong?
Sure. Well, that is the date that we have today. We're committed to that date, given what we know today about the revenue numbers, about the rebounding economic forecasts that we have. And your next question might well be with respect to the commitment that we had made a number of months ago. And the fact of the matter is one, some of those economic forecasts have changed over the course of the last 6 months. Two, we most certainly are committed to providing the supports to Saskatchewan people to ensure that as we weather what I hope are the last days, weeks, and probably a couple of months of this COVID pandemic, that we are continuing to provide those supports that Saskatchewan families and Saskatchewan people need, and also setting the stage so that we all in this province have the opportunity to participate in that economic recovery. As I said, the variable is the economic outlook, and that isn't just a variable for Saskatchewan. I think we're likely one of very few provinces that is forecasting out 4 years in these uncertain times. That variable is there for all Canadian provinces, and Canada as a nation who will be moving forward with their first budget on April the 19th, as well as other areas of the world. These are the best economic forecasts that we have today. We're confident that we'll be able to achieve that. We're hopeful that we'll even be able to achieve these numbers and ultimately balance even earlier.
And that's kind of similar to what you said just a few months ago when we asked you about this the first time, talking about revenue and how uncertain that was. But it seems like most of what's contributing to this large deficit is an increase in spending, which does seem to be more under control. Why couldn't you have foreseen that when you made the promise to balance the budget for the state?
Well, when you look at there are the economic revenue forecasts have changed. There are a number of investments that are being made, were being made even last fall, and 14 platform commitments that are being kept with this budget that is introduced here today. This COVID-19 pandemic has dragged on in a fairly severe fashion in Saskatchewan and other provinces and in other nations around the world as we see the variants of concern arriving, and we see ourselves now entering a third wave. Ultimately, we have to be there, and I think this points to the fact of the commitment that we will stand by, is we are going to be there to support the people of this province. We are going to be there to provide business and industry supports where they're required so that people can continue to earn a living and have a livelihood here in Saskatchewan. And we most certainly are going to provide the support so that as we exit this pandemic, that we have every opportunity to have that economic recovery, replace those jobs in our communities right across Saskatchewan. We're committed to that.
Why are we not seeing you get ahead of the COVID-19 wave in Premier, Estevan, Southeast Saskatchewan, Moose Jaw, and I guess possibly even Saskatoon, given the numbers? And I frame this on budget day because I'm kind of curious whether it is a concern, given precedent set in Regina related to subsidizing businesses, and whether you're worried right now that that's going to have to be extended elsewhere, and if that is the case, is that really good public policy?
I say I would be concerned and continue to be concerned, not just about those communities, but many communities across the province. And look, as we look ahead through the next number of weeks and month or two, the variants of concern of some type are going to be the predominant COVID strain that we have in Saskatchewan. We're all aware of that. They are in very high concentrations here in the city of Regina, increasing concentrations in those cities, towns that you had mentioned, as well as present in a number of other communities across the province as well. With respect to your question specifically about measures in those communities, that is a daily conversation that continues with our Chief Medical Health Officer and continues even today. It is never off the table to move on those measures. They've not been moved on at this point in time for a few reasons, one of them being each of those communities that you had mentioned has been focused, had a focus of having a mass vaccination clinic opened or will be opened in the next day or two, or opened in the last couple of days or will be opened in the next day or two, to ensure that we are prioritizing those communities where we do have increased levels of variants of concern, or VOCs, that we are providing that opportunity for folks in those communities to have as early access to a vaccine as possible. We're fortunate this past week in the delivery of just over 40,000, almost 50,000 AstraZeneca vaccines that we have received, and we're making those available in those communities as well as in the capital city of Regina.
We can't win that race really, because with what he calls a mass vaccination campaign, it doesn't get to enough people fast enough in certain age groups, given the variant spread to younger age groups. And I get what you're saying, and I sense that would be a frustration, but I don't see how, at this particular point, you can rely on a vaccination campaign to outdistance the COVID spread that we're seeing in those communities right now. So isn't that a poor strategy, if that is the strategy to get ahead of that? And if it isn't, what is the other strategy that we have in order to stop this before we see the same situation we're seeing in Regina right now?
So the only strategy through the pandemic is vaccines, and for vaccines to be available to as many people as possible. The only strategy to actually get through the pandemic is vaccines.
Well,
absolutely,
but
which is our goal.
But right now you acknowledge you have a short-term problem. You have a short-term problem at least in Regina. You have a short-term problem developing in Moose Jaw, in Swift Current, and probably in Saskatoon and a few others if their numbers are correct. So why would we not, or why would public health not be looking ahead and trying to get ahead of those problems so that we don't have the problem down the road related, then can depend on vaccines when the relatively slow rollout of vaccines can help?
The rollout of vaccines is increasing as we speak. As I said earlier, the daily conversations that the Minister of Health has with not only the SHA, but with Dr. Shahab, our Chief Medical Health Officer, do revolve around many of the communities that you have mentioned, because they do have in these early days increasing concentrations of variants of concern, understanding that the variants of concern are going to be the predominant COVID variants across the province over the course of the next number of weeks. We have significant measures in place in each of those communities, and as well as every other community across the province. Likely some of the most significant measures, public health measures that this province has ever seen in its history. And we trust that the people of this province, and have faith that they most certainly, and we are asking them most certainly to be following those public health measures to a T, understanding that the landscape is changing to some degree. But ultimately, at the end of the day, I stand by the words that I had said, that the path for all of us through this pandemic is vaccines. It is access to those vaccines by the majority of the population. And we're asking people, when it is your turn, we are going to provide you with a vaccine that is safe for your age group. And we're asking you to make your appointment or go to a drive-through clinic and accept the vaccine that is being offered to you. The measures that we have in place are effective. They need to be followed, and we're asking Saskatchewan people to continue to follow them. But ultimately, we're also asking Saskatchewan people to plan for the time when it's your turn to make your appointment and get your shot. That is the way we truly are going to be able to stick it to COVID.
The public health officials, the 21 of them, signed a letter saying the vaccinations are not enough to deal with the current issue, because younger people are working they can protect themselves as much as they want, but we see workplace outbreaks. So are we considering changing the vaccine strategy to protect the frontline workers, like many ER doctors, infectious disease experts are asking for in Saskatchewan, to try and protect those people that you're saying have to be at work because there's no sending them home right now?
So the conversation between the Chief Medical Health Officer, the folks in the Saskatchewan Health Authority that are running the vaccination program, which is the most robust and efficient program that I see occurring in the nation of Canada today. It's actually leading all of the other provinces in turning those vaccines around. That conversation is happening all the time with respect to priority, and if I would back up, I would say a number of weeks that we did change some of the priority in the early way in phase one. In phase one, as well as we changed some of the priorities in the first stages of phase two as well. So right now, the challenge we have with changing the priority moving forward is it's going to slow down our ability to deliver the high volume of vaccines that we've been able to thus far. And if you look at the next number of weeks and our plan to have everyone in this province have access to that vaccine by June, that means if we slow that down, we may not have everyone in this province to have access to a vaccine until a number of weeks later. The difference we are talking about, if we can continue on with the age-based criteria, the broad-based age-based criteria we have, and the mass vaccination centres that we have, and providing large numbers of vaccines to as many Saskatchewan people as possible in as short as time period as possible, is the most efficient and quickest way for everyone, including all of our frontline workers, including those that may be at some degree of risk with any type of an immunocompromised issue, have all of those folks receive their vaccine as quickly as possible. So at this point in time, what we are focusing on is how can we turn around the comparatively larger numbers of vaccines that we're receiving today and will be for the next number of weeks. How do we turn those around, make them available to Saskatchewan people as quickly as possible, immediately if we can?
The budget relies heavily on the vaccination plan going smoothly, and Minister Harpower said earlier today if that doesn't happen, there's going to be significant impacts on the budget. Also, regardless, there might be additional funding needed for COVID response that's not built into the budget.
Right.
Why not have a contingency fund or money set aside in case that does happen, because we don't know what's going to happen?
Well, I would say that we're in a more certain place than we were over the course of the last number of months, and in particular when we introduced, which would be our second budget over the course of this COVID pandemic, as today is our third budget, where we did have a couple $100 million contingency fund. We're fairly certain as we look ahead that we do have many of the supports in place that Saskatchewan people, Saskatchewan businesses, communities will need. We have a number of supports that continue to roll along over the course of the next year. I think last year was about $2 billion all told in supports. I believe we're about $1.6 billion in this budget year, and then 1.3 trailing for the 2 years after. So there's been significant supports that have been provided and continue to be provided in this budget. As we know, a significant amount more, I think, going into this budget, in fairness, about COVID supports that will be required, healthcare funding, for example, that will be required, than we did just under a year ago when we introduced the last budget that we had. So there is a significant amount of funding, and it shows in the deficit that we have brought forward here today. A significant amount of funding that is there to support Saskatchewan residents and support Saskatchewan people. This is lower than it was just less than a year ago in our last budget, but we did have the contingency there. I'd say we understand the needs and the supports that are necessary in a better fashion today than we did 10 months ago.
Retail sales are down by only like 1% this year, given people have been out of work or dealing with reduced income. What does this tell you about how consumers are spending their money, and how did that help in terms of PST revenue?
Well, the PST projections, and I don't know if the Minister of Finance touched on those, but ultimately we're looking for a slight decrease in PST over the course of the next year, possibly two, or as it relates to municipal revenue sharing. But for all intents and purposes, and I think this speaks to the the balance that we have tried to achieve here in Saskatchewan in keeping our residents safe, having faith in the fact that they will make the right decisions, and ensuring that we do have the opportunity to protect the personal freedoms that they have and the opportunity for them to carry on life in as normal a fashion as we are able through what is a very challenging and uncertain time. So we may have not received or experienced the reduction, for example, in consumption spending by Saskatchewan people, which will ultimately highlight in the finalized numbers of the provincial sales tax.
This year's budget deficit is going to be bigger than the one that was laid out in the NDP platform, and it's pretty close to the one that you attacked, Brian Moe, for allegedly hiding in his plan during the debate. And I'm just wondering if you regret those attacks now that you're being forced to run similar amounts of revenue, and what you would say to people that would accuse you of hypocrisy in that.
So I would just very quickly say that we've included all of the commitments and costed all of the commitments that we have in this budget. It fulfills all 14 platform commitments that we had in the campaign. With respect to the budget and the platform that the opposition ran on, they didn't include all of the costing with respect to the commitments that they were making. In fact, I believe they had about $2.7 billion deficit. They missed about $4 billion in investments. They did not account for that in any way in their platform commitments. Everything that we have committed to is included in this budget.
You're $1 billion out so far, because I think it's 1.7 in this fiscal year that you're looking at in terms of the 4-year.
Yeah, no, there's no doubt that the deficit that we've presented today and is larger than the one I think anybody intended for this province to have, myself included, if you look back a few months. There are some measures I think that people could pay attention to in this particular budget. We have the lowest net debt to GDP in the nation coming through this budget, which means that, yes, we have provided those supports to the people of this province when they're required, but we have done so in a very frugal fashion to ensure that we are, one, achieving the outcomes that we were hoping to achieve, and two, ensuring and understanding that there's only one taxpayer in this province, and that taxpayer has been asked for very much over the course of the last couple of decades, and we want to respect the dollars, the revenues that this provincial government manages on their behalf, and has given in the most recent election a 4-year mandate to continue to manage that.
And we've got a couple of questions on the line. I'll go to Steph first, and then Brian.
Mr. Premier, how many jobs is this budget going to create?
How many jobs is it going to create?
Yeah,
Oh. So we're down just over 20,000 jobs at the moment with respect to where we began pre-COVID. And I would say that the theme of this budget really will tell you where we're going to head over the course of the next year, and really set the stage for the opportunity to grow after the course of this year. So the theme of Protect Saskatchewan Families is about the investment, and ultimately the result is the deficit that we have. Building Saskatchewan communities, which, yes, does create jobs in the private sector, and working with our municipalities to ensure that we can utilize all of the streams of investment that we have to continue with our capital programs in community after community and as a province proper. And ultimately, as Saskatchewan has access to vaccines, is able to find our way through this COVID pandemic, start to recover our provincial economy, and then participate in the recovery of the global economy. As we all know, Saskatchewan continues to produce food, fuel, and fertilizer, which are all items that the global market has needed throughout this pandemic and will need in larger supplies as they start to recover their respective economies all around the world. We're poised very well to participate in that with opening up our 4 additional trade offices. We're poised very well to participate in that, and all of the meetings that various ministers have taken place, have taken part in with industries and with our partners, our purchasing countries around the world. And we most certainly feel that we will be able to not only recover, and we have faith in the people of the province that we'll be able to not only recover the jobs, the 20-some thousand jobs that we are short here today, but most certainly get back to the growth agenda here in this province and creating jobs right across Saskatchewan over the course of this year into next year, and starting to set out and achieve the growth targets that we had put in place, I guess about 2 years ago now.
You didn't provide a figure, Mr. Premier, so are you saying that those 20,000 or so jobs that haven't come back, we're not in a position in 2021 to bring those back yet?
I think we're in a position to not only bring those jobs back, but to look for the addition of additional jobs in the private sector across this province. When you look at right now as we speak, there is the largest potash mine in the world under construction just outside of Saskatoon and by the community of Jansen. We have had investments just over the course of the last couple of weeks in a major investment in Yorkton in a canola crush plant that is going to employ people through the construction of that plant, as well as long-term employment for folks in that community over the years of the lifespan of that plant, which will ultimately be decades. We see another fertilizer investment just to the west, a few miles to the west of Regina. These are good news investments for our province because, yes, they create construction jobs, but they also are creating long-term jobs for the people of this province. We are an export-based economy here in Saskatchewan, and most certainly, if we are able to continue to increase the value of our exports, like, for example, in Yorkton, selling canola oil rather than canola, we most certainly are going to increase the jobs and opportunity in this province directly through that investment, but also indirectly in all of the jobs that are going to support that type of an investment. And more to come on that front, I might say, as well. Looking at a number of other investments, there's a number of investors from all around the world looking at a number of investments here in Saskatchewan. We most certainly have every opportunity in the near future to not only recuperate the 20,000 jobs that we are short and get back on during COVID, but get back on the trajectory to a strong, growing, and vibrant province where we are continuing to outpace and increase our job prospects year over year.
You used the word frugal. I don't think many people would think a budget that was increased by $1 billion would be considered frugal. So can you explain what you think?
That was a comparative term that I had used with respect to, when we went into the COVID-19 pandemic, Saskatchewan had the third lowest net debt to GDP ratio in the nation. We have invested heavily, as we see in this budget, and we see over the course of the past year with investments we made in last year's budget with a significant deficit there as well. But we are now coming out of this pandemic with the lowest net debt to GDP ratio in the country, and I think that speaks to the accountability that this government feels with respect to the dollars that we are investing. They are not our dollars; they are the people of this province's dollars, and we want to ensure that as they're invested, yes, frugally, but also invested with an outcome in mind. And so that is what I meant by that term, Murray.
Brian? In the recent carbon tax ruling, when will we start to see big dollars spent for developing substantial either carbon capture and storage, small modular reactors, or both?
Well, I think in a not too distant future. What you will see in the next number of days is, as you know, Saskatchewan was partaking in a memorandum of understanding on small modular reactors with the provinces of New Brunswick as well as Ontario. You've also seen more recently interest from Alberta in joining that memorandum of understanding to ensure that we are advocating and advancing the small modular reactor conversation, technology, and relationships between, for us, the Saskatchewan Power Corporation and those folks that have the technology to build those types of facilities. I would say you will see the three provinces, the three original signatories, as well as the fourth being Alberta, coming out with some with some communication on this over the course of the next number of days or week or two with respect to the direction that we feel the small modular reactor conversation needs to go, and to what level and what degree the federal government would need to participate in that conversation, both in advocating, advancing the technology and the relationships, but also financially participating in ensuring that as we look ahead, we are, yes, reducing emissions in our electrical generation, our power grid here in Saskatchewan, but we are also doing right by the people of the province. You may see a similar conversation with respect to carbon capture and storage. We saw Alberta come forward with a request to the federal government a week or two ago with respect to the carbon capture and storage programs that are operating there. We have one of the first in Canada, one of the first earliest versions around the world, the first post-combustion coal-fired carbon capture and storage plant. And I would just say that there is a broader story for us to focus in on with respect to carbon capture and storage, and that is the enhanced oil recovery piece. The opportunity that we have had in this province to not only revitalize an aging oil field in the Weyburn-Mydale area, but the future opportunities that we have to use carbon captured off of our coal-fired plants and ultimately really participate in the ongoing discussion around hydrogen, for example, and some of the hydrogen production that we've heard Minister Champagne talk about, and we're hearing now some companies in Saskatchewan talk about. So many opportunities ahead on both fronts, the small modular nuclear power reactors, as well as the potential for really taking the next step in carbon capture and storage and moving it not only to bumping the yield and taking carbon out of every barrel of oil that we produce in the enhanced oil recovery process, but really moving this on to the next conversation around hydrogen production and some of the opportunities that we're being informed about, quite frankly, by private industry there.
Thanks, everyone.
Related question here in regards
Last
to,
question.
you gave major announcement last summer about the Baker irrigation project. And this budget says there's 18.9 million dedicated to that project right now. When will we start seeing big dollars towards that $4 billion project?
So the first phase of that project, I believe, is pegged at about $500 million. That's the expansion of the west side, which will open up, and I just can't recall the exact number of acres right now for irrigation. And it is really the start at building that industry, that irrigation industry, and changing even the crops and the value of the crops that we grow in that area, which ultimately leads to the attraction of different value-added food processors that we currently don't have here in the province, and leads us to then leverage the strength of that industry to expand to the entire west side, and then ultimately come down with the Lower Copel project, providing that important water security to communities like Moose Jaw and Regina, but also to industries, both in the food processing industry, but also in other industries, for example, the steel industry and others, potash industry, that ultimately use water and providing water security for that entire economic package, and ultimately for the people of southeastern Saskatchewan. What you're seeing is we're moving as quickly as we can on this file, ensuring we're doing our due diligence at every step of the way, but we've had the design and engineering firm has been awarded, as we know, to a Saskatchewan firm, and they're working on some of the design and ultimately the working towards a construction contract where we would start actually moving dirt for that phase one of the project. Once we're into and moving through phase one, you're going to see that same design and engineering firm start to turn their sights onto phase two, as we expect that phase one will have very rapid uptake by the folks that are in that area, and most certainly will start to build a very different agriculture industry in certain parts of this province than we have seen in Saskatchewan over the history of our province, and ultimately, excuse me, provide that water security for various other industries and municipalities to have for years into the future as well.
Thanks, everyone.
Good.